if you think about the migrant situation or like the illegal immigration phenomenon and its uptick over the past several decades, it's been continuously bad and problematic, and the border has been continuously porous. And it's never been closed by anybody, Trump included, when he was in office. And when Trump was in office, of course, his campaign, his first presidential campaign, rested heavily on the idea of creating a physical barrier on the U.S.
Hmm.
Mexico border. But by 2019, Trump had abandoned that idea and was promoting this smart wall. The biometric, an artificial intelligence powered smart wall that functions autonomously. And this is actually something that the Bush administration first kicked off. The newly created Department of Homeland Security at the time launched this program called SBI Net. Which failed and has sort of come back over the last several years or so and has been promoted both by Democrats and Republicans. So, for example, when Trump was his rhetoric about a physical barrier was being, Democrats were upset about it. Their response by and large was to promote the idea of a smart wall as opposed to a physical barrier. And this is a bipartisan agenda. And it's been creeping along the past several years rather quickly. And now, of course, what you have is, as you mentioned, this rhetoric, this renewed media attention, including an independent media being given to the border situation, which, of course, is going to get people more agitated and concerned about it. But it is something that has gone on for a long time. And I would argue that the media rhetoric about the problematic situation on the border is to argue, it is to, like you said, frame it in military style terms with the idea of manufacturing consent for a military style solution. And that's how they're going to sell it to the right. And they're also going to sell it sort of as a private sector initiative as opposed to a public sector initiative. But remember, all of this stuff, the digital ID agenda included, is a public private partnership. ID
Right.
2020 and those groups, that's how they function. It's a public-private partnership. And so the public sector leaning rhetoric appeals to the left, private sector leaning rhetoric appeals to the right. And the other ways they're going to try and pitch this to the right, and they're already doing it, is not just through increased border security, but as an answer to the voter ID issue. Vote with your
Right.
face. And this is already being promoted by people like Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, and people like that on the podcast circuit, saying, why don't we have Clear being like the company at airports alongside TSA where you can scan your eyeball, not unlike WorldCoin, and get through security faster. She was like, why not do that for voting? This is the beginning of them trying to manufacture consent to Trump's base, or rather right-leaning populists, for the same exact digital ID system that they were opposed to during COVID. Because
Clever.
it's very clever. And this is why I would encourage people to look at the current border situation as something that is being intentionally manufactured also by the Biden administration, because this is something where the Biden camp and the Trump camp agree. And precisely this intentional policy on the part of Biden's DHS is creating the situation whereby the solution that both parties want can be imposed, but the opposition, in this case, Trump, can write in and offer this solution, and his base will be clamoring for it, even though it's
Ah.
the exact same type of framework that was proposed during COVID. And of course, as you pointed out, the mandates were to force people to onboard onto this. So if you can't vote without digital ID, you can't get a job without digital ID. You have to prove you're an American citizen, right? Not a migrant. But the only way to do that now is with smart ID, just like the kind that Ron DeSantis, who was, opposed to all this COVID era stuff, he's already having that roll out in Florida, called exactly Florida Smart ID. And it's being produced by a World Economic Forum strategic partner based in France, Thales. Regardless of their rhetoric, we need to pay attention to their actions. And both parties are leading us to this technocratic system. You just have some where it's being framed as a UN public sector effort, and then the ones where it's being framed by private sector Silicon Valley oligarchs like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, who are building the same exact kind of systems for the quote unquote deep state that Trump supporters are supposed to revile. And it's precisely a Peter Thiel funded company that's building the smart wall right now. And there's a lot to be said about that, because the amount of connections to the CIA in that regard are truly
Mhm.
staggering. And so if Trump supporters knew that they're being tricked into supporting a CIA front company border wall as a way to stop migration. That's not just about keeping migrants out. That's also about, intimately tied up with the war on domestic terror agenda, which I think a lot of these people should know by now is directed mainly at them. And a lot of the groundwork for that war on domestic terror that's aimed largely at constitutional conservatives, but really also people that would be most likely to protest against government overreach. It says in the documentation that it's just about not just about targeting people on the right, but people on the left as well, if they get in the way of government policy. This system being built by Peter Thiel through Palantir and some of these other companies that are military and intelligence contractors. The groundwork was set under Trump. It's been expanded under Biden. This is a two-party agenda to curb domestic dissent, and they have been building it for a very long time, obviously supercharged after 9/11. But they're essentially being, sheepdogged into a situation where they're cheering on their own prosecution. And the same company supercharging drone warfare for the U.S. military industrial complex is the same company building the smart wall. Same company. It's Anduril is the name of the company. It was co-created by Palmer Luckey and Trey Stevens. Trey Stevens used to work for a U.S. intelligence agency. He refuses to say which one. Then he went to work for Peter Thiel's Palantir. He was on the board of Carbine 9/11, which was this very suspect Israeli intelligence-connected company that was heavily funded by Jeffrey Epstein and Leslie Wexner, chaired by Ehud Barak. Trey Stevens then was a key figure on Trump's Department of Defense transition team, and essentially set up a lot of the policy agenda for Trump's Department of Defense during his first term, and then teams up with Palmer Luckey. Palmer Luckey having been the creator of the virtual reality system Oculus Rift. That was sold later to Facebook, which of course Peter Thiel is very much responsible for the rise of Facebook, if not more so even than someone like Mark Zuckerberg. Facebook would not have become the company it was today without Peter Thiel backing it earlier than anybody else, and he was on the board for a very long time. And at the same time, by the way, that he was, creating and overseeing the rise of Palantir with the CIA's NQTel. So Palmer Luckey and Trey Stevens. It's Anduril is funded by Founders Fund as well, which is also Peter Thiel, and invested in Carbine and a lot of these other defense companies that are framing themselves, of course, as America first, and all of these things, and basically taking the contracts, military contracts from companies like Google. When Google engineers, for example, protest about the Pentagon's use of AI drone warfare and selling that to, for example, Israel and its wars on Palestine and things like that. When there's those protests, Palantir, Anduril, all those guys come and scoop it up and say that we're making America great again. But really the interest is the same thing that people like, the guy that created Blackwater, Eric Prince, has been pitching to the Trump camp for some time now. The idea of privatizing our foreign wars that will be saving taxpayer money and all of this stuff. It's this play again from public to private, just like we get ping-ponged from one party to the next. The answer is the opposing party from the one that's made this big mess we're in now. But really, both parties are working together to make the mess. And it's the same type of ping pong between Democrats and Republicans, between the public sector and the private sector. People forget there is a revolving door between both sectors, and it is the same group that is leading us into this agenda. Both parties, both sectors, they all collaborate, and you can't really tell where one ends and one begins at this point. It's really just rhetorical differences and maybe some narrative differences, but it's all, superficial and public facing at this point, to try and get people to really just to follow through with the age-old divide and conquer playbook. That's essentially what's happening here. But Anduril is a very spooky company. They've been supplying autonomous drones to Ukraine, where no humans are involved in the mass murder of people based on AI facial recognition. Of course, one of the other companies that Peter Thiel has helped create is Clearview AI, which has also been contracted by the Ukrainian government and is presumably being used by this, which scraped all of the pictures off of Facebook, again connected to Peter Thiel, and has been using those pictures to create the largest database for facial recognition in the world, presumably. And it's coming together to basically create a totalitarian surveillance nightmare
Yeah.
brought to you by Peter Thiel and the CIA.